Hey. Nice to see you. Thanks for tuning in to an update about the ER and what is happening with this whole situation, the evolving epidemic as we're seeing it inside our hospitals. Because, I think in the absence of better idea of what's going on in the community, which I'll mention, I think is going to change because we're going to have a more aggressive testing strategy. I think is probably going to be announced tomorrow. Yeah, probably tomorrow. So I think that we're going to get a greater sense of what the actual burden is. But right now, it's useful to hear from this perspective because we can only just extrapolate based on what we're seeing in the ER and in the ICUs, what the situation is in Toronto, because people really don't know, and it's troubling. It's troubling for a couple different, hey kiddos, from Ethiopia, yo. Norway. It's troubling because it's tough to continue to gather goodwill and consensus when no one really knows what the effects are. So I'll tell you that what is happening from our side, so you can get a sense of how effective it's been. But first, I'm going to bring up what I think I know is on your minds. This mustache looks ridiculous, and I'm like, yeah, that's redundant. It's a mustache. It's supposed to look like that. So there's not a lot of other ways to be irreverent right now, is there? All right, so straight up from the ER, I've heard some more cases today of sick COVID people, which is unsurprising. We've seen some, we haven't seen too many. In fact, a lot of the things that we're getting from in our ICU are coming from other hospitals that seem to be trying to lighten their load in the ICU. So we've like flexed into a lot of more open space in the ICU based on what's happening around the world, meaning we stopped surgeries like cardiac surgeries where people need to go to the ICU, the CV ICU afterwards because they've been put on bypass and they need days to recover. So those surgeries aren't happening, which is unfortunate. That's a whole other kind of tangent, but we have space. So people are sending us their sick COVID cases, and we're learning quite a lot about how to manage them without really having to kind of make it up on the fly like a lot of our colleagues in Italy and the US were doing. And I know we are with them in some ways because we're really hoping that we don't get to that situation, but we're also prepared that we do, and we've learned so much from the sharing of information already. Typically medical information moves in fits, meaning something happens, you get together with a bunch of people, you try to capture it to the greatest clarity, you publish it, and then it disseminates. But now, just because of Twitter and podcasts, we're getting this kind of clinical information from all over, particularly from New York, about how to manage these cases. So I'm going to come to something clinical. I'm going to go to testing. Then we're going to move to this kind of experiment that we're doing with socially right now with some friends of mine, because I think it's legit and it's probably the best hope we have to really not just flatten the curve, because we just want to dead it. And we're going to dead it and drive it into the ground in such a way that this is replicable and transferable to different environments. So not just can we dead COVID before summertime comes around, which I think we can, but can we, when COVID-28 hits or whatever the equivalent is, can we move into a space that gives us a certain amount of certainty and autonomy so we feel we're in control of our lives rather than just in this extended kind of bardo of waiting for something but not being quite sure what it is, a wave of sick people or a plan. So, okay, so those three things, all right? And then we'll get to the meditation part. I'm answering a clinical question. If anyone has anything they want to shout out, you can do that on this thing. I can see the stream. But for those of you who are clinical nurses or just curious people or otherwise involved in these cases, some question has come up is, are we treating these cases in the wrong manner? Meaning, are we intubating them too early? Is intubation the best strategy for these people? Does it cause further lung injury? Because this isn't a classic pneumonia case. It is something that looks a lot more like high altitude pulmonary edema, which is like micro trauma at the level of the membrane that lines your lungs, over which oxygen moves and carbon dioxide moves back and forth. So the thinking is that there's actually perhaps some damage, and it's not as complicated as the inflammatory response that we'd typically see in a pneumonia situation. The difference in this for me is kind of academic at this point. It's I'm not going to say irrelevant, but in terms of management, it is not really going to affect the way I practice. It does change something with the ventilator settings. I won't get into that, but your ability to ventilate someone, put them on a machine that mimics their breath, relies on how compliant, how spongy their lungs are. So if they're very inflamed and they're rigid for, say, something like a pneumonia, other inflammatory stuff, then compliance can be more difficult. So what people are suggesting is that it's actually easier to ventilate these people. It's just a matter of time and the body's ability to recover, rather than the actual ventilatory support as being complicated. So I don't know if that makes any sense, but does it look like high altitude pulmonary edema, or does it look like a pneumonia? Well, it looks like its own thing. It's COVID, and it has a general immune inflammatory response that has as its consequence inflammation in the lining of the lung. That means that, as far as we can tell, it looks like the ability of the body to get oxygen is, touch my face again, shit. The ability of the body to get oxygen is impaired because of this general inflammatory response in your lung. That includes your lung, so it includes your whole body. That's why you get feverish, and that's why you get aches and pains, and that's why you feel like shit. This is all over your body because your body is having this tangle with this invader. Some people suspect that there's this article on Medium going around saying like that a protein in the virus binds to like a hemoglobin. Binds to hemoglobin. So actually the problem is like it displaces iron. Is it bind to iron or hemoglobin? One of the two. The two kind of interchangeable. But in this instance, they suggest that the virus actually interacts with the heme group on the iron, or one of the proteins in the hemoglobin. I find that would be very surprising, because I don't know why. That'd be like a side effect. It wouldn't have a survival advantage, and I don't know why they would do that. Because it really just wants to get inside our cells and just party and make proteins and to get more copies of itself out and out and out. So it's really kind of esoteric and academic. I guess the take-home clinical point is, would I sit on a person longer without intubating them? And I think that's probably the general approach to working in a pandemic situation. Is there's not a rush about anything. So it's not like you have a critical case come in, even like 6 months ago, one critical case comes in, they look hypoxic, meaning their oxygen is low. So you just like jump right on that, you intubate them, you do all the stuff, start pressor agents, give antibiotics, whatever you think is the most aggressive and quick form of doing your maneuvers or answering their clinical kind of weakness or problems. But now, because you're expecting so many patients, you're not getting too turned about any one particular case. So I think that it's just wise to have that that sense of calm about approaching each of these cases on an individual basis, and probably not jumping to intubate anyone right away. Sitting on them and just kind of watching them. And I think for me, if you can just tell when someone looks like shit. If you ever need to make this assessment for yourself, this is how I would suggest you do it. If you ever seen a kid with croup before? And they actually look okay. Like they're breathing. You can hear like because they have a narrowed subglottic area until they're about 5, and then things kind of spread apart a little bit, so you don't get really croup after that age. But up until that point, if you see like a 3-year-old and they get this certain type of rhinovirus, I think, then they can sound really crummy actually, but they look good. They're like happy and they're like interacting with the environment and they're playing, and you're like, they're going to be cool. And Jill knows this. Hi Jill, she's the pediatrician. So that's a metaphor for when you see someone who's in respiratory distress, and the way that I would probably approach these patients, given that hypoxia or low oxygen is a part of this disease spectrum, is how does that person appear? Are they confused? That's probably, once it gets to drowsy, because when you're healthy and you're short of breath, you're not excited about that. You're kind of got a little bit of a panic look. You feel uncomfortable. Your adrenaline is up. You're one of the perturbations of your central system is wants you to solve what's going on. So you're alert. So if you look good, if you're talking, even if you're slightly breathless and your oxygen sat isn't that great, I think we're probably going to just see how you do for a bit, try you with some oxygen, and see how that improves things. Maybe turn you over, prone you, get some of the inflammation in a more dependent way, so your oxygen can move more freely in other uninflamed parts of the lung. But if people are drowsy or confused, then we are going to obviously recognize that as a critical person whose most important organ, which is the brain, is not getting what it needs, and then we're gonna intervene. And so I think that's just a bit of a difference. The initial thing that came out from this was China. From China was like intubate early. And now from New York, they're saying, maybe just out of necessity, don't jump to anything very quickly. Give it a bit of the tincture of time is a safe way to do it. So I don't know. Every case is different. You can't say one thing with certainty about another person, because that's a different person and different responses. So one kind of critical thing about dealing with this illness or anything kind of like it is just choosing not to fear, choosing not to live in fear, choosing not to let fear make your decisions. And I mean that in the context of dealing with these individuals and dealing with this pandemic. So, those of us who work in the ER, I read the other day someone saying, oh, if you're not anxious before you go into your ER shift, then you should retire. And I'm like, no, I don't agree with that at all. I don't agree with that. I'm not anxious when I go into my ER shift. I'm excited. And the two can feel the same. You're getting prepared, but I'm not afraid. I'm not psyched about getting COVID, or nobody is, obviously, but I'm not afraid. I choose not to be afraid. And I think that when we're dealing with something as invisible, intractable as this, I would encourage people to make a similar choice. Don't act from a place of fear, I guess is what I mean by that. I mean, choosing is maybe not as so simple as that. But don't act from that place of fear, or recognize that you're afraid and then be more mindful about your actions. So that stands for working in this situation with these hypoxic patients in the ER, with the idea of us facing floods of them in the coming weeks if the numbers are going to continue to trend up. We're not afraid. We have resolve. We're not, I wouldn't say that we're happy about it, but we're prepared and we're determined. And that's I think the larger wisdom about facing this or whatever comes after it. If we kind of respond out of fear, then we're going to make mistakes. So it's never a good idea. I remember when I first was learning how to do resuscitations as a medical student, and my teacher, who was an ICU doctor, said, if he gets called to a code blue, or which is an urgent situation that needs your immediate attention, he's like, yo, take your own pulse, walk to that thing, don't run. And to some extent that is the case. So that's how we're living this life in the ER. So that's the clinical situation about lung findings in these patients. I'll know more because we're just seeing more and more of these cases. I'm working a night shift tomorrow, and we certainly see more of these then, when there's few doctors around. The last night in the ER, then I'm going to move to the testing and then this containment strategy, and then that's it. So last night in the ER, pretty mellow, maybe a couple cases. I didn't manage them. I was in what we call a moderate exposure. There's no low exposure, and there's no negative. There's only moderate exposure and high exposure. High exposure are people who have, and I really appreciate that change in language, and I want people to think about that. I want you to think about that in your behavior. There is no risk. Maybe there's like low risk, but for us, it's like, it's called moderate, is as low as it gets, because that's just the way it is in the hospital right now. But there is no risk. Even if you swab negative, that's not no risk. Those tests are only 70% sensitive, PCR, single test 70% sensitive. So you can't say that you're no risk. You can say that you're low or moderate, but there's no such thing as zero. And I was in the moderate risk or a lower risk area, and I saw the usual smattering of things. But what I did see, which was the only thing that has remained consistent throughout this pandemic, because we're not seeing as many heart attacks. We goddamn know people are staying at home holding their chest. We're not seeing as many strokes. We goddamn know people are still like, I can't seem to move my arm so well as I did the day before. That's a static number, I'm sure, right? But one thing that we do see, and so we're trying to figure out how to capture those people, and I don't know. But one thing we do see is the same number of people who are vulnerable on the street, who are typically men, not always, but it's more common that a man has no social safety net because they burned all the bridges, they're I don't know, been violent, or I don't know, they're sad and they isolate, and it's more rare for them to have a safe place to go. So that has remained constant throughout this. People who have this kind of vulnerability and they're on the street and they don't have anywhere to go. So saw the same number of those cases, and probably an increased number of mental health cases of people who are totally freaked out. They don't feel safe to go outside. They don't feel safe to interact or even get groceries and stuff like that. So that's on the incline. Everything else has been more or less our numbers are like almost half. And of course the numbers of the COVID cases are higher. But someone asked me about flattening the curve in BC. How did they do that? I don't know if they've done it. I mean, I don't believe any of this data, to be honest with you. It's until you have true screening, which is like you go and like go door to door and you swab people. We don't know what the cases are. So that's, I'm not sure. All you see is Japan. Oh, how did Japan do it? Oh, guess what? They didn't. It just flared. So until you get what's called the R value, which is like how many people a single person infects, down to less than 1, then it's going to pop off at some point. Once it reaches a critical threshold, and that number, 1.6, 1.7, depending on what part of the world you're looking at, then because like 1 infects 2.7 people, infects 7 people, and then boom, boom, boom. So I don't think anyone's really nailed it yet. I do think that spring is going to be helpful. I don't know why. I think that more UV rays and more just kind of general, vitality, I think can help things out a little bit. But I don't know if BC or anyone's really saying they've solved this problem yet. Neither have we. But it does make me wonder why we haven't seen the crunch of cases that we would have expected by now. So, Canada is doing something right. And I don't know why anyone's not talking about us, because our deaths are pretty low and our numbers are pretty low. So that's we're kind of quiet about ourselves, but we're doing something right. I'm not quite sure what it is, but having a health system to believe in that's integrated and that you can trust is probably the best thing that we can do. And then who's better, New Zealand or Sweden or Germany? Who fucking cares? What's the right answer? Well, the right answer is everyone is involved in mitigating the harm to the most vulnerable people. And how there are the different flavors or versions of what that looks like? Definitely. But everyone is involved in that. So by people staying home and doing this, your social distancing, is that better than Sweden's strategy of not doing that and being really aggressive with testing? It doesn't matter. What's the matter is the effect, is that we've seen, we've relieved the worst of it to make space for the most vulnerable people. So from that perspective, it's been a complete success from the Canadian side and the Toronto side too. So keep doing it, please. I know it sucks, and it's just, I think we can go to the from the middle game, have a strategy here soon, and I'll spend a couple minutes on that, and then we'll move to the meditation. Okay, to testing. So that's been a puzzle for all of us. And I know I was talking to a friend of mine, Sarah, in Ottawa, and I know that they're a little bit different than we are in Ontario, but Canada, actually all across the country, our testing per million is pretty good. I mean, I think it's up there with like Korea and some of the more aggressive models. But Ontario, it's the pits. Ontario is the worst of the bunch. We got the most people, and it's like we're the worst. So we're all a bit puzzled about that, because apparently we have the capacity. Apparently we have the reagent. We have the test. So we're like, well, we want to tell people, because then they take it more seriously. So it's a difficult it's a difficult answer. It's not like the people here are fools, but here's the trouble. And this, I'm just going to put this to you so you get some of the why it's been slow to come. The reason why is that the test is 70%, right? So if you get typical symptoms, you come into the ER or wherever testing center. I think that they should come to you, actually. That would be the best. You go into the ER, you get tested, and you're positive. So that's the feedback that we want to give to people, so then they know whether they can, how long they have to isolate, and public health can start to trace, and it's helpful. And that's some of the strategies that have seemed to have worked in other places. However, 70% is a lot like 2 out of 3, right? It is 2 out of 3, more or less. And 70 to 80%, I guess they say. But 70%, 2 out of 3, that's not great. That means 1 out of 3 people think they don't have it, kinda. So they're like, are they going to be as careful? So what's better, saying to people, not even testing them, and saying, you maybe have it. What the priority here is for us now is to keep these testing lines open so we can swab cops and nurses and city bus drivers and people who work at the power plant, so we can get these people back to work, and let's swab the people in the hospital so we know how to protect other people. I don't know. So that's the debate. I think we're all wanting to move forward with this model of testing more and more people. And I think it's going to form an effective part of our strategy, because I think people are going to get bored of the social isolation thing, and they're going to want to start understanding more about what the disease actually looks like. But that's why it's been a bit slow to come and slow to pivot. But I think it's going to do that. All right, last thing, and then we'll move on to meditation. Unless anyone, you can shove questions in there if you want. I missed a couple, I'm sorry. A friend of mine and I are working on a mathematical model that looks at him more than me, because he gets it in a more sincere way. But if you've read in the New England Journal, this guy Finkelman wrote an article about crushing the curve in America in, I don't know, by June or 3 months or something. It's worth taking a look at. I mean, I think it's a crappy, Art, his name's Art. I think it's a kind of a crappy paper, but it's not referenced, just kind of his opinion, and doesn't really take into account the disease or what's happening in other places. So, but hey, homeboy's got a lot of experience, and I'll leave it to that. But one of the things he recommends is like aggressive testing, quarantining people who not just are at high risk, but who are low risk, keeping people away from their families. I don't know, it's very complex, and I don't know how easily that's going to be to manage on a societal level, particularly in the United States. It also asks for a leader. So, I mean, I don't know if everything's conditional on that, because it doesn't seem like one is soon to emerge. So what it misses is kind of an approach to being isolated. And I want to share that with you, and then I'll update you if the model works out a little bit, because it makes intuitive sense to us. So I just mentioned this to people who are kind of serious about this, and how to lock into it in a way that may give you a sense of returning to normalcy or having some kind of rhythm, because right now it's just like acres of uncertainty, So that one way I think you can be smart about it is to do what is like we're doing in the ER, which is like exposing ourselves to risk. So lower risk. So like I said, in the ER, it only ever goes down to moderate, because I don't know if the person who I'm seeing with schizophrenia, even though they say they don't have a cough, just doesn't understand the question, so I can't say that area is low risk. Moderate risk, like I'm protected, like I'm wearing a face shield and a and a mask that whole time. Gloves when I'm in the room. I'm not even examining patients that much. So what we do is we do moderate risk and then the higher risk thing, and then we take a break. I don't mean that day, we take a break for several days. So what I think is the smartest way to work with this right now, unless the math doesn't work out at all, is over a couple days you do your running around, your the lower risk stuff of getting even Amazon packages, ins and outs to your home. One day of kind of higher risk stuff, which is like grocery stores, going to your doctor, pharmacy, whatever is the higher risk, delivering groceries to your mom in her nursing home, whatever. I'm not saying it's high risk, I'm just saying it's higher risk. You can protect yourself. I think everyone should be, if we're going to lean into this, everyone should be, have a face covering and probably gloves on. So if you did those 2 days of risk exposure and then took 8 days off, I think that's the best number right now that we've come up with, 8 days. Then if you get sick, you spare the community your transmission. So the change in the frame of reference is this one. We're moving away from saying, well, I don't want to get this, to I don't want to give it, knowing that 99% of us are going to be well, except the vulnerable people who we want to protect. Well, I'm not worried about getting it, I'm worried about giving it. And now, if I'm able to, and the second thing is I'm treating my household as one unit, and I'm not going to lose the integrity of that unit. So now there's no real ins and outs in the situation, but if we've got it, we're going to get sick with it. Now with this new testing strategy, I hope we're going to get tested, we'll know, we'll be quarantined, we'll recover, we'll be immune, we'll be cool. But we're not going to give it to anyone, because the way this thing is getting around is passing around these in the asymptomatic phase, a couple days before you feel kind of shitty, but it hasn't really reached your conscious mind and you're shedding viral particles. Keep people in this integrity of this unit, like no variances, not like, oh, I'm just going to bump to, eat the York Mills or whatever and get my Costco shipment that day, because you don't know. So in those 8 days, you're pretty locked down. And then I think that we'll have a natural extinguishing phenomenon to the community spread. So, that works only as well as we can mobilize as a population of people, or a city of people, or even a neighborhood of people. And once this works out in terms of we toss it around a little bit more and plug the numbers in and look at the variables, I'll be more deliberate about what I mean, because I'd love to hear your feedback on that. But I think that's just an intelligent way to work right now, is change the mind. I'm not worried about getting it. I'm worried about giving it. I'm more likely to give it during this asymptomatic phase where I'm not sure if I'm feeling good or not, or I have symptoms or not. And I'm going to protect myself during these periods of exposure, so I minimize my risk. But I can't help but think that with that strategy, there's no way that the virus can live. The advantage of this is that things can kind of creep back to more of a normal, even like social time, where if you know that everyone in your house has been cool and you're negative after 8 days off from interaction and ins and outs within your unit, you can imagine probably being, in a socially distanced way with other people. I'm not going to contravene the government's advice to say have no more than 5. It's not really my biz, but I think that's what we're looking for. We're looking to get it only works if everyone in the house does this. You can't you lose the integrity of the model if people are filtering in and out of the house. Then you have to treat the house, the way we looked at the models, you treat the house like a person. The only way to treat it like a person is if you have the integrity of a body and you're not, moving in and out. So I'll share more with you about that soon. I think that's about it. So, that's the latest and greatest. Treatments haven't changed. We're really just hoping that with this different attitude towards testing, we're giving people more of what they're asking for, which is a bit of certainty. I do feel that if you're ever, if you're in a situation where you're with other people in an enclosed space, you should be wearing face covering. When I do it and I go into grocery stores, I'm a face covering and gloves. Not like surgical gloves, just like gloves that live at my door. And when I drop them off the side of the door, I wash my hands. Yeah, I think that's about it for now. I'm not going to get into too much about wellness. I think I'm going to answer that probably on Friday, on Good Friday. Someone asked about daily walks. That's legit. Yeah, you should do that every single day. You should do that every day. The first thing that you should do when you wake up in the morning is get out. Get out. You can space it so you're not, crowded around people if you think that that's not the right time. But there's evidence in the pediatric literature that it helps adolescents with insomnia if you expose them to UVA and UVB, just sunlight, at as early as possible once they wake up. It decreases the latency of sleep onset. So that's something I know to be true because I'm such a weird ass worker. My shifts are just all over the map. But when I want to get back to the regular schedule, I'll give myself like a good dose of sunlight, and that just keeps us healthy, and ensures that we stay healthy, because there's two ways around this illness. One is like fastidiously don't catch it, be as meticulous as possible with hand hygiene and this and that, and the other is like be resilient. Is it possible that there are some people who get exposed and don't catch it? Probably. Actually, it's true. Yeah, definitely true. How can you be that person? Well, I mean, there is that, the simple advice that everyone knows. But I would definitely include, not being isolated in your house, not being too isolated socially. Distance, yeah, if that's one strategy, but what you want to create is a situation where if you do get exposed, you do get infected, that you're going to recover as quickly as possible. So I think that those two things, they're not mutually exclusive. You can diminish the transmission. Like I said, the only way to think about this thing is, that makes sense. If you just think the world's out to get you and you could get infected at every possible time, you're gonna live in a constant stress state. You're gonna become like those bats in that cave that developed this virus, got it so many times that it mutated into something that infected a pangolin and then moved to a human. There's a lot of not just conjecture that all of these zoonoses, the HIV, Ebola, COVID, comes because of environmental stressors that we put on these animals, because they live in constant stress, because their habitat is diminished, they can't communicate because of the racket, they are being feasted on because they are protein sources in places that have few of them because the forests have collapsed. There's no natural way to live off of that land. So they get sick. They're in constant stress and they get sick. And so, I think that it's a paradigm shift for those of us who, like I said, if you live in constant fear of your neighbor that you're going to get this disease and you can only just protect yourself, then you're enduring possibly the same weaknesses that allowed this to emerge in the first place. So the way to change that is, I'll do what I can to protect myself. I'm going to be smart about my isolation and my risk exposure, but I'm also want to be resilient. So I'm going to continue to shore up my vitality by being healthy, by be careful what I take in. And I mean by that, what news you take in, what relationships you take in. Sure, food is an easy one, but it's not just that. It's all of that stuff that comes and makes us, gives us integrity and gives us a sense of wellness, and even in the face of sickness, the wellness, ability to repair ourselves and be strong. And so that's why the social isolation thing sounds kind of tinny to my ears, because you can't be socially isolated and healthy. That's the patients I saw last night in the ER, the men who sleep on the street and who are intoxicated because that's the only way to get by. They're socially isolated. We're physically distancing in order to try to decrease the chance of us giving this to other people in case we get it. And we're using this time to be healthy by being outside, getting UVA, UVB rays in our eyes, allowing us to sleep, feeling it in our skin because we're Canadian and we don't get a lot of that. And being careful how much stress we expose ourselves to by the type of things that we take in. But that outstrips this conversation by a lifetime. And actually, I'm writing about that, so that's in my book. And actually, if you go to my, there's like a Facebook page, Dr. James Miscallick. There's an interview there with a naturopathic doctor in India that really kind of points at some of these things. So you can check that out. He's really cool. I'll post a longer one later, but it's a different way of thinking than allopathic medicine. Now we live in a Western society, and what allopathic medicine is like world versus us, disease versus us, cancer versus us, virus versus us. But not everyone thinks that way. That's just the way we think, because that's the news. That's what the newspapers, that's what schools teach. And that's what the news, I'm not saying it's wrong, it's just a different way of thinking. But there are billions of people who don't think that way. Billions of people who don't think that way exactly. And they're not right and we're wrong, or we're not wrong and they're right, or vice versa. I think I just said that, but there is this other way, which is we have an ability to cultivate our health such that we endure infections and we avoid cancers. Anyway, that's it. Okay, cool. So one of the things we're going to do now is we're going to meditate, and I'm just going to go get my timer. So those of you who want to stick around, please do, because I'm going to meditate and then I'm going to go chill because I'm back on night shift tomorrow, and I'd love to be here longer, but I have to take care of myself. Dope. All right, those of you who got to sign off, sad to see you go. Those of you who want to stick around, we're going to expand on the meditation thing that we did 2 days ago, which was talking about the two main foci of meditation, which is external world, where an independent observer would say, yep, that's a real thing. That's a sight. That's a sound. That's a touch. Something's touching. Something fell off the shelf. And the internal world, which is only seemingly available to us, is an approximation and of a private world that is no one would know unless we shared it with them, or we read books, or had heartfelt conversations, or listened to songs. So this is a certain style of meditation. It is called Vipassana. And Vipassana is a way of untangling those the strands of your experience, being clear being clear about the strands of your experience and knowing them and knowing their nature. And through knowing the nature of your sensory experience, getting insight into the nature, perhaps the ultimate nature, certainly the nature of other people's experience. Yes, certainly the nature of what it's like to be a sensing thing. What it's like to be a sensing thing. And what happens as we go more clear about our experience and what it is like to be a sensing thing, we develop a place that is less reactive. Yeah, less reactive. I think that's safe to say. Doesn't mean you don't react. The idea is not to get into a state of where nothing affects you. It's the opposite. I feel that the sorrow of losing my mom more acutely because I feel it on all these different levels. But what it does mean is that it doesn't come up as me being angry at my patients, because I know where it lives in me. And where it came from for me was when I was working in Sudan, and that was a hard time that was difficult for all of the reasons you might imagine. Watching people hurt themselves and starve to death and rape and endure very austere and difficult things. I left it with a very heavy heart, and a lot of things were coming up for me that were a result of my feelings about that weren't helping me get through it. They were actually just making it worse. So without getting too biographical, when I knew I wanted to do the work, but I wanted to find it from a place where I didn't get beat up. I didn't get beat up by it. I didn't have to huddle and recover and leave and then get my resilience back up and then go do it again. I wanted to figure it out at the moment how to be skillful. Then I found this practice and it gave me that opportunity. So it really it's integral for me, for my medicine, for it to work and know how to be there with people and know myself so I can be honest. All right, so the inner outer. That's the first thing you pay attention to, inner outer. And then you start to become more clear. So what we're going to do today is we're actually going to work with just the outer system. Last time, if you remember, if you want to go back and watch the previous video, we did this kind of march around. We did inner, outer, and just let it all hang out. This time we're just going to work with outer. And it sounds like this is going to be complicated because there's going to be different options. Inner, outer, sight, sounds, images. It's actually just being skillful and smart and knowing what works for you when. So the outer works for me when I have a vivid inner. I have a lot of stuff going on inside that is not giving me a bit of rest. So I want to tether somewhere that feels a little bit more stable and sturdy. And that doesn't mean you can't just go into those images or talking or whatever or feelings. You can, but it's fractious. It can seem like a lot. So the other option is to just kind of stabilize somewhere else and then just hang out. And typically what happens, your mind, because its orientation is such that if it detects a problem, it really does have your best interest at heart, right? If it detects a problem, it just wants to bat it around, even if it's insoluble, even if you can't solve it but through time, even if you can't solve it from till tomorrow, or even if you can't solve it because it's in the past. If you said something to someone and you didn't mean it, and they're not picking up their phone for you to explain, are you just gonna be like, oh well, I guess I'll just figure it out when I talk to them? Typically not. So this was a chance for us to try to find a place where we find a bit of something that seems sturdy. Okay, we're just gonna do 20 minutes because I've just talked forever and I want to move on. 20 minutes. Get yourselves into a comfortable and alert position. I know you can do it. Cool, wherever you are, you can sit, you can stand, you can recline. The intention is to just kind of be awake for this because it helps us know ourselves. And that's what we're looking for right now. To know ourselves. And then the long road to loving ourselves. Different things. So as the last of those echoes from that bell fade, then just let your awareness drift to your body. For right now, just the shape of your body. Your body at rest. As always, there's the breathing that's happening in the middle of our body, or that's where we feel it. Of course, the breathing's happening all through it, at the cellular level even. Occasionally you can get a flavor for it. If you get this, like if you sit for a while, you get this vibratory kind of quality throughout your body, the nerves and the blood just kind of creating this sense of frisson. For right now, we'll stick with the most obvious manifestation of it, the breath. So you can do two things here. You can kind of like sweep your body from like forehead, eyes, ears, mouth. Kind of just let that almost like a Star Trek kind of scanner kind of move down you. Really just like, not just imagine the image of your body, but just really feel it, chest, shoulders, arms, abdomen. Really feel it. Your pants or shorts around your waist. And then to sit with the whole feeling of you. This is a good thing to do if you want some rest. Your mind feels busy. You stay really still. Let your attention linger in your body and just start to kind of just coax it to land on the really quiet spots, the blank spots in your body. you'll find that, if you need a nap and you can't fall asleep, this strategy actually works pretty good. You can just stay 15 minutes in a really still pose, attention on your body, quiet spots, and can give you some of the rejuvenative qualities of a rest. Your mind, is certainly called to you by now, or it's doing its thing. It really is beautiful in its insistence. Let it. Good. So there's this solid place there for you, and if you want to stay there, by all means. And you can try that just anytime, really. Morning, lying in bed, having a nap. It counts. That's real meditation. We're going to do a kind of a tour of the inner world, and I like to do this on the the outer world rather. We'll get to the inner next time. So if you want, you can take that awareness that was probably just starting to enjoy itself, luxuriating in your body, if that's what was happening, and bring it to the auditory world. So now we're going to take this tool of our concentration, our attention, and we're going to pour it in a different direction to sound. So we're not trying to necessarily focus on one particular sound, at least not for right now, although that sometimes comes up and your attention just lasers on it. Like we were doing with the body, we're going to pay attention to sound in general. As if your ears were just kind of creating these two almost like spheres that were curious about all of the ranges of sound for a mile in either direction. The bell pealing, the car, a high-pitched tinkling sound sometimes we can get in our ears. And one thing to notice is not just how beautiful a a song can sound after you've done this for 10 minutes. But just the almost champagne bubble-like quality of the sounds as they continue to change. So it's almost inevitable that you get drawn into your inner kind of sounds, your inner world about one thing or another, detail remembered, or one you want to return to. And that's cool, but when you notice that, just give yourself permission to use that opportunity to expand the auditory world, the external auditory world. Again, as we've noticed before, sometimes a sound will come in. It'll be from the external world, and your image will shoot up into your mind. And just something to notice. Okay, last of the triad, the external world of sight, the objective world. Now you can certainly open your eyes or half open them and leave them defocused, but I find for me that's a lot of information, and I tend to get really into my talking mind gets very excited. So if you want to keep your eyes closed, just the black kind of scintillating shapes and pulsing colors and depths of trying to peer through your closed lids. It may be stable, it may be shifting. It's no preference really. Just noticing, just being aware. And what happens by doing this, it's almost, you'll see for yourself whether details emerge. Not just in meditation, but in the life that follows the meditation. You can let me know. Okay, for the last few minutes, we're going to let all the external world rise. All of our senses, sight and sound, and of our being in our body and the earth touching us. Just, we're going to let ourselves anchor in the outside world. If you get pulled to sound space, that's cool. The image space, the external kind of with your eyes open or blank spaces of your closed lids or your body. We'll let the inner world for now just do its own dance. Turn to that another time. Meditation's almost over. It's shorter than usual, than I typically like, but I'm going to bring a question to you that I just want you to reflect on once it's over. And that is, after you open your eyes and you come into what's next, do you notice, even temporarily, more space? In sound, in sight, and I don't know, just the way that you move. Doesn't need to be an answer, yes, just a question, really. And it's because sometimes I do. Not always, but sometimes. And what's interesting to notice is into that space comes something that feels like patience or love. Sometimes sadness, but it's not bad. It's like a permission. one way or the other. That's what I wish you. Permission to be who you need to be. Patience, kindness, love. Sick. Cool. You guys are dope. I'm working a night shift tomorrow. In some kind of small way, I'm just like, I really want work. I like chaos. You know, a lot of us are like, when's it gonna come? When's it gonna come? No one wants to see anyone get sick, right? Obviously, but if a bunch of people get sick, you kind of like, you want to be there. You know, you want to be doing your best of what you know. And so I'll let you know. You know, like I said, hopefully no one does, but if it has to happen, there's a bunch of us who are ready to do the best that we know. So thank you for being there with me. Next time on Friday, we're going to just stick with one of those things. So we went like broad, 2 days ago. We tried to cover a lot of territory. Hey, Claire. This last time, we're kind of a little bit more specific. What I hope you felt was your attention, being able to move with these 3 places. So what is that thing? How can we start to resolve it like a camera lens? And if so, does that lead us to that place that we were talking about, where you get a bit more space? So we're gonna work with sound, and we'll listen to some music, which will make it fun. Have a great Thursday. See you on Good Friday. Peace.